many people have many prophecies about this time. They say at the beginning of each cycle of time, the Great Spirit comes down through a messenger. He makes a strong appearance upon the earth. And we are coming to an end of a cycle now. It's not the first cycle. There was a cycle of spirit. There was a cycle of the mineral, the rock. There was a cycle of the plant. And now we're in the cycle of the animal, coming to the end of that and beginning the cycle of the human being. When we get into the cycle of the human being, the highest and greatest powers that we have will be released to us and be released from that light or soul that we carry to the mind. But right now we're coming to the end of the animal cycle when we have investigated ourselves and learned what it is to be like an animal on this earth. And at the beginning of this cycle of time, long ago, the Great Spirit came down and He made an appearance. He gathered the peoples of the earth together, they say, on an island that is now beneath the water. And He said to the human beings, He said, I'm going to send you to 4 directions, and over time I'm going to change you to 4 colors. But I'm going to give you some teachings, and you will call these the original teachings. And when you come back together with each other, you will share these, so that you can live and have peace on earth, and a great civilization will come about. And He said, during this cycle of time, I'm going to give each of you 2 stone tablets. And He said, when I give you those stone tablets, don't cast them upon the ground. Because if any of the brothers and sisters of the 4 directions and the 4 colors cast their stone tablets on the ground, not only will human beings have a hard time, but almost the earth itself will die. And so He gave us each a responsibility, and we call that the guardianship. And to the Indian people, the red people, He gave the guardianship of the earth. And we were to learn during this cycle of time the teachings of the earth, and the plants that grow from the earth, and the foods that you can eat, and the herbs that are healing earth. Time, but almost the earth itself would die. And so He gave us each a responsibility, and we call that the guardianship. And to the Indian people, the red people, He gave the guardianship of the earth. And we were to learn during this cycle of time the teachings of the earth, and the plants that grow from the earth, and the foods that you can eat, and the herbs that are healing. So that when we came back together with the other brothers and sisters, we could share this knowledge with them, because something good was to happen on the earth. And to the south, He gave the yellow race of people the guardianship of the wind, and they were to learn about the sky and breathing, and how to take that within ourselves for spiritual advancement. And they were to share that with us in this time. And to the west, where there's blackness of night, He gave the black race of people the guardianship of the water. And they were to learn the teachings of the water, which is the chief of the elements. It is the most humble and also the most powerful. And to the north, where there's white snow on this continent, He gave the white race of people the guardianship of the fire. And if you look at the center of many of the things they do, you will find the fire. In this light bulb, they say that is a white man's fire. If you look at the center of a car, you will find a spark. If you look at the center of the airplane, the train, you will find the fire. And the fire moves, also consumes. This is why it was the white brothers and sisters that began to move upon the face of the earth and reunite us as a human family, because they had the guardianship of the fire. This was their responsibility. And so a long time passed, and the Great Spirit gave each of the 4 races 2 stone tablets. Ours are kept at the Hopi Reservation in Arizona, at Four Corners area. I've talked to people from the black race of people. Their stone tablets are at the foot of Mount Kenya. They are kept by the Kikuyu tribe. I once had the honor of presenting a sacred pipe of the Kikuyu tribe carved from the red pipestone of Mount Kenya. One time I was at an Indian spiritual gathering. Medicine man from South Dakota put a beaded medicine wheel in the middle of the gathering, and it had the 4 colors in the 4 directions. He asked the people, where is this from? And they said, oh, probably Montana, South Dakota, maybe Saskatchewan. He said, this is from Kenya. It was beaded just like ours, the same colors. The stone tablets of the yellow race of people are kept by the Tibetans in Tibet. And the guardians of the traditions of the people of Europe are the Swiss. In Switzerland, they still have the mask day when each family brings out its mask. They still know the colors of their families. They still know their symbols, some of them. Each of these 4 keepers happen to be people that live in the mountains. If you went straight through the Hopi reservation to the other side of the world, you would come out in Tibet. The Tibetan word for sun is the Hopi word for moon, and the Hopi word for moon is the Tibetan word for sun, because they're on the opposite sides of the world. They said that the roads of this land would either go north-south or they would go east-west. If they went north-south, we would come together as brothers and sisters. If they went east-west, there would be destruction, and almost the earth itself would have a hard time. So you all know the roads went east-west. They said things then would be lost from the east to the west, they would be lost from the south to the north. But they would come back from the west to the east, and come back from the north to the south. So in 1976, from the west to the east coast of this land, from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., people carried a sacred pipe bundle by hand on foot across this land. Because they said if we carried this bundle across the earth, the powers would begin to come back. It was carried from west to east. They said a spiritual fire would be lit in the north, and it would come down the northwest coast of this land. This is it. We have the capacity to start the spiritual fire now here. The old people long ago seen it and foretold it. So we went through the cycle of time. Each of the 4 races went to their directions and they learned their teachings. And we were given a sacred handshake to show when we came back together as brothers and sisters that we remembered the teachings. It was indicated on the stone tablets that the Hopis had that the first brothers and sisters that would come back to them would come as turtles across the land. They would be human beings, but they would come as turtles. So when the time came close, the Hopis built a special village to welcome the turtles that would come across the land, and they got up in the morning and looked out at sunrise, and they looked out across the desert and they saw the Spanish coming covered in armor like turtles across the land. So this was them. So they went out to the Spanish man and they extended their hand, hoping for the handshake, but into the hand the Spanish man dropped a trinket. And so word spread throughout North America that there was going to be a hard time, that maybe some of the brothers and sisters had forgot the sacredness of all things, and all the human beings were going to suffer for this on the earth. So tribes began to send people to the mountains to have visions, to try to figure out how they could survive. At that time there was 100,000 cities in the Mississippi Valley alone called the Mound Civilization. Cities built on great mounds. Those mounds are still there. There was 100,000 cities of native people. And they were wondering how they could survive, live off the land, because they knew a hard time was going to come. They began to send people to have visions, to see how they could survive this time. People came on the East Coast, and we were told in the prophecies that we should try to remind all the people that would come here of the sacredness of all things. And if we could do that, there would be peace on earth. But if we did not do that, when the roads went clear from east to west, and when the other races or colors of the earth had walked clear across this land, if by that time we would not come together as a human family, the Great Spirit would grab the earth with his hand and shake it. And so if you read the treaty negotiations from Red Jacket of the Six Nations on the east coast of this land, clear to Chief Joseph and Chief Seattle on the west coast of this land, they all said the same thing. Chief Joseph said, "I accord you the right, and I hope that you accord me the right to live in this land." We always were trying to live together. But instead of living together, you all know there was separation, there was segregation. They separated the races, they separated the Indians, and they separated the blacks. So when they got to the west coast of this land, the elders that were aware of many of these prophecies, when they got to the west coast of this land, they said they would then begin to build a black ribbon. And on this black ribbon, they would move a bug. And when you begin to see this bug moving on the land, that was a sign for the first shaking of the earth. And this first shaking of the earth would be so violent that this bug would be shaken off the earth into the air, and it would begin to move and fly in the air. And by the end of this shaking, this bug would be in the air around the world. And behind it would be a trail of dirt. And eventually, the whole sky of the entire earth would become dirty from these trails of dirt. And this would cause many diseases that would get more and more complicated. So the bug moving on the land, of course, it's easy to see now. In 1908, the Model T Ford was mass-produced for the first time. So the elders knew the first shaking of the earth was about to come about. That's the First World War. In the First World War, the airplane came into wide usage for the first time. That was the bug moving into the sky. And so then they knew that something very important would happen. There would be an attempt to make peace on earth on the west coast of this land. And so the elders began to watch for this. And they began to hear that there was going to be a League of Nations in San Francisco. So the elders gathered in Arizona around 1920 or so, and they wrote a letter to Woodrow Wilson, and they asked if Indian people could be included in the League of Nations. At that time, the United States Supreme Court had held that a reservation is a separate and semi-sovereign nation, not a part of the United States, but protected by it. And this was a concern because people didn't want the reservations to become more and more separate. They didn't want them to be considered nations. So they did not write back, and the Native people were left out of the League of Nations. So that circle was incomplete. In the League of Nations circle, there was the southern door, the yellow people. There was the western door, the black people. There was the northern door, the white people. But the eastern door was not attended. And the elders knew that peace would not come on earth until the circle of humanity is complete, until all the four colors sit in the circle and share their teaching, then peace will come on earth. So they knew things would happen. Things would speed up a little bit. There would be a cobweb built around the earth, and people would talk across this cobweb. When this talking cobweb, the telephone, was built around the earth, a sign of life would appear in the east, but it would tilt and bring death. It would come with the sun. But the sun itself would rise one day, not in the east, but in the west. So the elders said, when you see the sun rising in the west, and you see the sign of life reversed and tilted in the east, you know that the great death is to come upon the earth. And now the Great Spirit will grab the earth again with his hand and shake it. And this shaking will be worse than the first. So the sign of life reversed and tilted, they called that the swastika. And the sun rising in the west was the rising sun of Japan. These two symbols are carved in stone in Arizona. When the elders seen these two flags, these were the signs that the earth was to be shaken again. And the worst misuse of the guardianship of fire is called the gourd of ashes. They said a gourd of ashes will fall from the air. It will make the people like blades of grass in a prairie fire, and things will not grow for many seasons. The elders tried to contact President Roosevelt and ask him not to use the gourd of ashes because it would have great effects upon the earth and eventually cause an even greater destruction in the third shaking of the earth, the Third World War. So they knew that after the second shaking of the earth and they saw the gourd of ashes fall from the sky, they knew then they would be trying to make peace on the other side of this land. And because the peace attempt on the west coast had failed, they would build a special house on the east coast of this Turtle Island, North America. And all the nations and the peoples would come to this house, and it would be called the House of Mica. It would shine like the mica on the desert shines. So the elders began to see they were building the United Nations made out of glass that reflects like the mica on the desert. So they knew this is the House of Mica.